What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices clashes with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Morgan Freeman sits down with Jimmy Kimmel, and what should have been a routine promotional interview turns into the most explosive confrontation in talk show history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The familiar theme music played, the audience applauded on cue, and Kimmel delivered his opening monologue with his trademark smirk. But what nobody in that studio audience could have predicted was that they were about to witness a legendary actor reach his breaking point on live television, leading to one of the most dramatic walkouts in late-night history. Morgan Freeman, the 87-year-old Oscar winner, known for his distinctive voice and dignified presence, was scheduled to appear as the evening's main guest to promote his latest film project. The veteran actor, who has graced countless interview couches over his decades-long career, seemed prepared for what should have been a standard promotional appearance. He walked onto the stage with his characteristic calm demeanor, that familiar, gentle smile, and the poise that has made him one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. But from the moment Freeman settled into the guest chair, there was something different in the air. Kimmel's usual pre-interview banter felt forced, almost aggressive. The host's questions carried an edge that veteran Hollywood observers in the audience immediately noticed. Instead of the respectful tone typically reserved for industry legends, Kimmel approached Freeman with an almost confrontational energy that seemed completely inappropriate for someone of Freeman's stature and age. The trouble began almost immediately. Rather than opening with the customary pleasantries about Freeman's latest project, Kimmel dove straight into controversial territory with a question that caught everyone off guard. "Morgan, you've been in this business for over 50 years, Kimmel began, his tone carrying an unmistakable condescension. "Don't you think it's time for actors of your generation to step aside and make room for younger, more diverse voices in Hollywood?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Freeman's eyebrows raised slightly, the only visible sign of his surprise at such an opening. The studio audience fell silent, sensing that something was already going very wrong. This wasn't the respectful interview they had expected to witness. Freeman maintained his composure, but his response carried a subtle warning. "Jimmy, I've always believed that good storytelling transcends age, race, and generation. The industry has room for everyone who brings something valuable to the table." His voice remained steady, but those who knew Freeman well could detect the slight tension creeping into his measured words. Kimmel, however, seemed emboldened rather than cautioned by Freeman's diplomatic response. Instead of backing down or shifting to safer ground, he doubled down with an even more provocative follow-up. "But don't you think your generation had its chance? I mean, how many times can audiences watch the same old faces telling the same old stories?" The disrespect was now unmistakable. Freeman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his famous voice took on a harder edge. "The same old stories?" he repeated slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "Jimmy, I think you might want to reconsider that characterization. The stories I've been privileged to tell have spanned decades, genres, and experiences that have resonated with millions of people across generations." But Kimmel wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk that his critics had long found insufferable, and delivered what would prove to be his most inflammatory comment yet. "Come on, Morgan, let's be honest here. Don't you think your best work is behind you? When was the last time you did something that really mattered, that really moved the conversation forward?" The question was so loaded with disrespect that even Kimmel's own audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was Morgan Freeman, a man who had given life to some of cinema's most memorable characters, whose voice had narrated countless documentaries and films, who had earned every accolade the industry could bestow. To suggest that his work no longer mattered was not just professionally insulting, It was personally cruel. Freeman's response was swift and cutting. "Jimmy, I think what really matters is treating your guests with the respect they deserve, regardless of their age or the number of years they've been working. That seems to be a conversation you might want to have with yourself." The rebuke was delivered with Freeman's characteristic calm, but the message was crystal clear. The audience could feel the tension radiating from the stage. This was no longer a promotional interview. It was becoming a battle of wills between two very different men with very different approaches to their craft. Kimmel's face flushed red, his ego clearly bruised by Freeman's perfectly delivered comeback. Instead of gracefully acknowledging the correction or attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground, he made the fatal mistake of escalating further. "Oh, so now I'm getting a lecture on respect from someone who's been coasting on the same gravelly voice routine for the past 20 years? The audience gasped audibly. Several people could be heard murmuring in disapproval. This had crossed every line of professional courtesy and basic human decency. Freeman's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since sitting down, his legendary composure began to crack. "Coasting?" Freeman's voice dropped to that dangerous low register that moviegoers knew meant trouble was coming. "Young man, I've been working in this industry since before you were born. I've earned my place here through decades of dedication, craft, and yes, respect for others, something you seem to have forgotten entirely." The confrontation was now in full swing, and everyone in the studio could sense that something unprecedented was about to happen. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a generational clash between old-school Hollywood professionalism and new-school shock-value entertainment. And as the tension continued to build, it became clear that one of these two men was about to reach their breaking point. Kimmel, sensing he was losing control of the narrative, made a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand by going even lower. His voice took on a mocking tone that sent chills through the studio audience. "Look, Morgan, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Maybe it's time to hang up the acting shoes and let the next generation take over. How much longer can you keep playing the wise old mentor character anyway?" The insult landed like a physical blow. Freeman's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles visibly whitening. The camera caught every micro-expression on his face as decades of professionalism warred with righteous indignation. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made even the cameramen pause in their work. "Jimmy, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." Freeman's words came slowly, deliberately, each syllable carrying the force of his legendary presence. "In my 50-plus years in this business, I have worked with directors, writers, and yes, hosts who understood the meaning of respect, who understood that this industry is built on collaboration, not on tearing down the people who paved the way for everyone else." The studio had fallen completely silent. Even the production crew, who had seen countless celebrity meltdowns and heated exchanges, recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't manufactured drama or scripted controversy. This was genuine outrage from a man who had been pushed too far. But Kimmel, perhaps driven by ratings desperation or simply unable to back down from the hole he had dug, chose to dig deeper. "Oh, come on, don't get all sanctimonious on me. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The old guard lecturing everyone else about how things used to be done. Times change, Morgan. Maybe you should too." Freeman's response was swift and devastating. "Times change, yes. But basic human decency? That should be timeless. The fact that you think disrespecting your guests is somehow progressive or entertaining says more about you than it does about me or my generation." The audience began to murmur their approval of Freeman's words. Even in Kimmel's own studio, with his own audience, the tide was turning against the host. People were visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the interview, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others looking genuinely angry at what they were witnessing. Kimmel noticed the shift in the room's energy, and his desperation became palpable. Instead of gracefully extracting himself from the situation, He made the catastrophic decision to attack Freeman on an even more personal level. You know what, Morgan? Maybe the problem isn't just your age. Maybe the problem is that you've been playing God and wise mentors for so long that you actually think you are one. When was the last time you took a real risk? When was the last time you did anything that wasn't just Morgan Freeman being Morgan Freeman? The attack was so personal, so calculated to wound, that even Freeman's legendary composure couldn't withstand it. His eyes flashed with an anger that few had ever seen from the typically mild-mannered actor. When he leaned forward in his chair, his entire presence seemed to fill the studio. A risk? Freeman's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow every person in that studio heard every word. You want to talk about risk, Jimmy? Let me tell you about risk. Risk is building a career on talent and integrity instead of cheap shots and manufactured controversy. Risk is earning respect through decades of hard work instead of demanding it because you have a microphone and a camera. The words hit Kimmel like physical blows. His face went from red to pale, then back to red. Again, he was clearly out of his depth, facing an opponent whose verbal skills had been honed over decades of performances and interviews. But instead of conceding defeat, he made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Oh, please," Kimmel shot back, his voice cracking slightly with strain. "Don't lecture me about integrity. Half your career has been playing the same character over and over again. At least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend to be some sort of moral authority like you do." The accusation of hypocrisy was the final straw. Freeman slowly rose from his chair, his full height and presence commanding the attention of everyone in the studio. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had seen and done more than his accuser could ever imagine. "Moral authority?" Freeman repeated, his tone now carrying a dangerous edge. "Jimmy, I've never claimed to be a moral authority. I've simply tried to be a professional, something you clearly know nothing about." The studio audience began to applaud. Freeman's words, a clear signal that they had chosen their side in this battle. Kimmel looked around desperately, realizing that he had not only lost control of the interview, but had actually turned his own audience against him. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was becoming the most spectacular failure in late-night television history. Freeman remained standing, his presence now dominating the stage in a way that made Kimmel look small and petty by comparison. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who has lived through decades of change in this industry. Someone who could have shared stories and insights that your audience might have found genuinely interesting. Instead, you chose to turn it into a cheap attack piece." Kimmel tried one last desperate gambit, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "Come on, Morgan, sit back down. This is just how we do things here. It's all in good fun." But Freeman wasn't having it. His response was delivered with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Good fun? Jimmy, there's nothing good about disrespecting your guests. There's nothing fun about trying to humiliate someone for your own entertainment. And there's certainly nothing professional about what you've done here tonight." The tension in the studio was now so thick, it was almost suffocating. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. This wasn't just a celebrity spat. It was a masterclass in dignity under fire, and a devastating exposure of unprofessional behavior that would have consequences far beyond this single evening. Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, made one final attempt to salvage the situation. His voice took on a pleading quality that was painful to watch. "Look, Morgan, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we just reset and talk about your new project? That's what you came here for, right?" Freeman's response was immediate and crushing. "What I came here for, Jimmy, was to have a professional conversation about my work. What I found instead was a host more interested in creating controversy than conducting an interview. You've made it very clear what kind of show this is and what kind of host you are." The words landed with devastating precision. Around the studio, crew members were exchanging glances, some nodding in agreement with Freeman's assessment. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a complete breakdown of the basic respect that should exist between host and guest. Kimmel's desperation reached new heights as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "Come on, this is live television. This is what makes for great TV. People love this kind of thing." Freeman's laugh was cold and humorless. "People love watching someone get humiliated for your entertainment? Jimmy, if that's what you think makes great television, then you and I have very different definitions of greatness. Great television elevates everyone involved. It doesn't tear people down for cheap applause." The studio audience erupted in sustained applause, clearly showing their support for Freeman's position. Some audience members were actually standing, now showing their disapproval of their host's behavior. The cameras captured it all: the audience revolt, Freeman's dignified stance, and Kimmel's growing panic as he realized he had lost complete control of his own show. In a last-ditch effort to regain some authority, Kimmel tried to pull rank. "Look, this is my show, and I'll conduct it however I see fit. If you don't like it, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on." Freeman's response was swift and final. "You're absolutely right, Jimmy. This is your show, and you've just shown everyone exactly what that means." He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering his knockout blow. "As for agreeing to come on, that's a mistake I won't be making again, and neither will a lot of other people, if they're smart." The threat was implicit but clear. Freeman's words carried weight in Hollywood, and everyone in that studio knew it. This wasn't just a guest walking away from a bad interview. This was a respected industry veteran essentially blacklisting a show and its host. Kimmel's face went white as the implications hit him. "Now wait just a minute," but Freeman cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and final. "No, Jimmy, I've waited quite enough minutes already. I came here as a professional courtesy, to promote a project I'm proud of. Instead, I've been subjected to disrespect, ageism, and outright rudeness. That ends now." Freeman began to remove his microphone, the simple action somehow carrying enormous symbolic weight. The studio fell completely silent except for the mechanical sounds of cameras and equipment. Every eye was on the legendary actor as he carefully unclipped the small device and placed it on the table beside his chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Freeman said, addressing the studio audience directly, "I want to thank you for your time and your courtesy tonight. You deserve better entertainment than what you've been given here." His words were a direct indictment of Kimmel's hosting, delivered with the kind of grace and dignity that made his criticism even more devastating. Kimmel made one final, desperate attempt to stop the disaster. "Morgan, please, just sit back down. We can work this out. Let's just—" Freeman turned to face Kimmel directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the finality of a door slamming shut. "Jimmy, some things can't be worked out. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. You've shown me and everyone watching exactly who you are as a host and as a person. I have no interest in enabling that behavior any further." With that, Freeman turned and began walking toward the stage exit. His movement was unhurried, dignified, purposeful. He wasn't storming off in anger. He was making a calculated decision to remove himself from a situation that had become untenable. The distinction was important, and everyone watching understood it. The studio audience began applauding again, this time even more enthusiastically than before. Some were actually giving Freeman a standing ovation as he walked away from the interview that had gone so catastrophically wrong. The sound of their applause followed him as he moved across the stage, a clear signal of where their sympathies lay. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, watching his show implode in real time. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his humiliation. His producers in the control room were undoubtedly scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage something from this disaster, but there was nothing to salvage. This was a complete and total breakdown. As Freeman reached the edge of the stage, he paused and turned back one final time. His parting words were delivered with the kind of quiet authority that had made him a legend. "Jimmy, I hope someday you learn that true entertainment comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. Your audience deserves better. Your guests deserve better, and frankly, you deserve better than what you've become." With that final devastating assessment, Morgan Freeman walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host whose career had just been irrevocably damaged, an audience that had witnessed television history, and a moment that would be replayed and discussed for years to come. Kimmel sat alone on his stage, the applause for his departed guest still echoing in his ears, knowing that he had just experienced the most humiliating moment of his professional life. The cameras finally stopped rolling, but the damage was done. In trying to make great television through confrontation and disrespect, he had instead created a masterpiece of his own professional destruction. The silence in the studio was deafening, as everyone processed what they had just witnessed: the complete and utter professional demolition of a talk show host by a guest who refused to be disrespected. It was a lesson in dignity, professionalism, and the consequences of forgetting that the people who sit across from you are human beings, deserving of basic courtesy. Morgan Freeman had entered the studio as a guest promoting a film. He left as a legend who had just delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in television history, all while maintaining the kind of class and dignity that had defined his entire career.